into the microphone. My name is AJ Fox. I use they, them pronouns. This is Nearing, and Nearing is very tired and probably hanging out. So before we begin our service today, I wanted to share a post from a brief bit of a post that some of you may have seen on Facebook today. This comes from Don Underwood. What follows is a statement of support for replacing Springfield Energy Conservation Code to be presented at the City Council meeting on April 18th, 2022 by Don Underwood. The statement was approved by the board on April 17th. And on Monday, last Monday, Don read this statement at the City Council board. So the statement goes, the board of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Springfield and the First UU Environmental Justice Action Team are in support of the proposed ordinance to repeal the Springfield Energy Conservation Code and replace it with the 2018 International Energy Conservation Code. It is our firm belief that the revisions are necessary to prepare the community to deal with the challenges we all face as the climate crisis evolves in coming years. It will also put the city government in a position to complement the conservation efforts of Springfield City Utilities. It is our fervent hope that this will be the first step in Springfield. We can't see more. The first step in Springfield, joining other cities around the state and nation on a journey to being more conservation oriented and sustainable.
Good morning. My name is Maria. My pronouns are they, them, and she, her. And AJ and I are doing the message today. And this past Friday, we celebrated Earth Day. And it's already been 52 years since the first Earth Day in 1970. At that time, it was a national awakening to the dangers of impending climate change and a call to action to reverse course for our deteriorating environment. Unfortunately, today for Earth Day 2022, we are still talking about climate change. And it's not a pretty topic. It's a hard one. But for our purpose today is not to talk about the mechanics of climate change, the ice shelves, the air particles, the temperature rates. We assume you already know these bits and pieces or can find the information elsewhere if you're interested. Our goal today is to talk about how we might anticipate how climate change changes our world at a personal, localized level. This is a message about community, resilience, and hope. Still, these conversations might make for some tricky navigating for young families, and honestly, a bit of existential crisis, existential climate dread might be activated for some of the adults in the room as well.
Outside the building, on your way to the back door, there's a sign that reads, treat the earth well. It was not given to you by your parents. It was loaned to you by your children. It's just a simple little yard sign. Somebody knows where it came from. Metal post and a ceramic tile with the words and an etching. Can you stop singing already, please? Here, you sing for just a second. Make a big sing. Okay, now it's my turn, okay? Okay. It's just a simple little yard sign, metal posts and a ceramic tile with words and an etching of a sea turtle with a blue shell. And each time I pass that sign, I feel such a deep, complicated grief. It's not shame. I don't think anyone in this room, unless any of you have an unsavory past working for Exxon Oil in the late 1970s when they were passing memos about acknowledging in detail the future impacts of climate change, should feel shame about the earth and the quandary life-sustaining habitats face. I don't think we should feel shame. I don't feel shame. And in fact, I bet that most of us in this room have done a heck of a lot to try to throw the brakes on this beast? This is where I'm gonna ask you for like a show of hands. And this is where like I hang out with 5-year-olds comes out. Who here has, y'all over in the corner, this applies to you too. Who here has recycled aluminum or plastic or paper? Okay. Who here has composted food or yard waste to enrich your soil? Has anybody had any new things grow straight out of the compost bin? My sister once lazily raised and then ate compost pile pumpkins. Has anybody had any strange things come out?
Sweet potato.
Marilyn says sweet potatoes. I don't like leaning back. Okay. Who here uses at least sometimes reusable grocery bags? And the number of Priuses in the parking lot tell me that there are other choices, bigger choices, being guided by environmental ethics being made around here. What are some other things you've done to help the earth?
Recycled fashion.
Recycled fashion. That's thrift store goodness. Upcycle clothes. What else?
Conserve water and electricity.
Ooh, just use less to begin with. Scoop says conserve water and electricity. Try to buy used items.
Take my own takeout containers to restaurants to haul my meal home in.
Yeah, take your own takeout container to restaurants so that you don't have a new styrofoam one every time.
Ditch the gas stove and go induction electricity stove.
Ooh, ditch the gas stove and go induction electricity stove. Johnson.
Use whatever you had or try to find someone who would be able to give it to you.
Okay, so use what you already have, make do with what you got instead of go out and buy new. All right, there's a lot of answers there. Keep thinking about it. We'll be back.
Environmentalism and concern over the wonder of our green planet is not a recent innovation. The struggle for balance between consumption and the natural world is as old as Thoreau sitting on the bank of Walden Pond, as old as German naturalist Alexander von Humboldt writing in 1825 about his experiences in what is now Venezuela. When forests are destroyed, the springs are entirely dried up, he wrote. The beds of the rivers are converted into torrents whenever great rains fall on the heights. Hence it results that the destruction of forests, the want of permanent springs, and the existence of torrents are three phenomena closely connected together. That was back in 1825 when he was writing that. We humans have been watching the interaction of humans in the surrounding world with concern and apprehension for centuries. The issue of environmental destruction, even of climate change, isn't new. But the conversation up until this point has been about how to stop it. Like many of you, I grew up hearing over and over again, how if we do this thing, make this change, pass this legislation, or if we do just this other thing, then we can stop climate change. It's been all about prevention up until now. The problem we are talking about today is not the earth is warming and how can we stop it. The problem we are talking about today is the earth is warming. The impacts of climate change are here now. And how do I meet my family's physical and emotional needs while still living ethically with other people both near and far? 50, even 20 years ago, it was reasonable to ask as the primary question, and what can we do to stop it? Today, the forest burns, the coast flood, and the insects disappear. Today, the issue of climate change is a current threat. Not a threat to the planet, the earth itself will survive, but certainly a threat to our way of life and to many, many people's lives. What is being destroyed is the earth's ability to sustain a balanced habitat for humans in places where humans, many humans, currently live. The issue is not simply a love for the natural world, as much as it is an examination of the ethics of being in this world. Having said that, we don't want to shut down hope. We still have hope. Over the past 50 years, we've made some changes. We have passed some of the legislation needed, and there have been massive scientific and technological breakthroughs being made, and I mean, we're hoping for more soon. There is still the potential for diplomacy to come through as a win. And I 100% support each of us carrying our reusable tote bags down to the farmer's market and using shampoo bars instead of plastic bottles full of liquid. So please don't take anything we say here today as a last hope. There is no question that we can and should continue with our mitigating efforts to prevent the worst of climate change. But the question we are asking today, here as a people of shared values and principles, is how do we navigate this while keeping our shared humanity intact and central?
Why do I feel grief when I see that sign telling me that I didn't inherit this earth from my parents, but instead was loaned it by my children? As a lifelong lover of the library, I have a lot of respect for the idea of loaning out materials. In fact, arguably, the ability to check out materials from the library has been an act of environmentalism across my life, and allowed me to have a deeper understanding of our earth as well. When you check out a book from the library, what do you do with it? You read it, you use it, return it. A conversation we have a lot in my house is that we don't leave it on the living room floor and then play like leapfrog between it, that books are not for standing on, books are not for stacking in interesting piles, books are not, we wouldn't use a library book as a coloring book, right? Right? We return it as we found it. And occasionally, when we get a little too enthusiastic at flipping pages, we like put a little piece of tape on it. And if we did destroy it, the library would want us to replace it, pay it back. Right? When you return a library book, others get to use it. But the book we've checked out feels not only out of my control, and my carefully crushed aluminum cans are a good step, but not enough. But here's the thing. The data shows that they'll never be enough, right? Me crushing my aluminum cans, me taking the bags to the farmer's market, which I do and support you doing, they're never going to be enough. And when I see the sign, it reminds me that my great-great-grandchildren will live here. And I feel some big, complicated feelings. And that's what we're holding space for today. The feelings, and the way that those feelings might be different in different bodies and different moments. And also the way that this thing, in combination with other factors, how it's going to change the world.
There is a model of grief offered by Dr. Kubler-Ross in 1969 that says as people process through grief, there are some predictable stages that take place. Dr. Kubler-Ross seemed to think that these were happening in a particular order, but we now know that grief isn't exactly, an exact science. People experiencing grief jump through the stages and back and forth between them. Regardless, this is a useful model to help us think about how we might visualize the grief we are talking about here. The stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But what does this mean when we're talking about a globally impacting catastrophe? And one that we shouldn't stop trying to stop. First of all, it means acknowledging that each of us have a different perspective and life experience. Each of us might be at any stage in this model of grief on any particular day. And since we've already had 2 generations, 50 years, of addressing climate change. It also means that we have some major generational differences for how this grief is being processed and how our experience of the world even is. For some people in our congregation, climate change and its response has been a thing they've watched occur over their lifetime. Some of you remember the Clean Air Act, the Save the Whales movement, like the global banning of the CFCs. And then some of you were born into a burning world, one that is past the can we stop climate change question. And where the only conversation that can reasonably be had is how much of the harm can be mitigated and how does humanity proceed from here. This is a different process for each of us, and yet we are in together.
So let's talk about these stages of grief. What might each stage look like for climate change? I just want to lean forward on this mic, I'm sorry. Okay. What about denial? I bet we all know what denial of climate change looks like. Right? What's it look like? Tell me.
Annoying.
Not how do we perceive it in others, what does it feel like? What does it look like internally?
Driving a big car.
Driving a big car. Okay, so maybe, what would denial of climate change look like?
Saying that humans aren't impacting the environment with our actions.
Saying humans are not impacting the environment with their actions. Saying this isn't a problem, or there's some other reason.
Just in Jeff City a couple weeks ago, don't trust the scientists and their research.
Okay. Don says that just in Jeff City a couple weeks ago, people were saying, don't trust the scientists and their research.
The cognitive dissonance.
And it can't be what Luna said was cognitive dissonance, the experience that we're thinking we know one thing to be true, yet we're behaving a different way, that's that discomfort, right?
When you say you're a vegetarian and the person replies, well, I'm gonna eat 2 steaks tonight, because you told me that.
Okay, we're going up in the weeds here. How about anger? What does anger look like when we're talking about grief and climate justice or climate change? What does the anger?
Unless it's well directed, it doesn't do anything except make you madder.
Okay, so Foxy over here said, unless it is well directed, it doesn't matter. But what does the anger look like?
Well, when Carter was president, there were solar panels on the White House, and he was really into environmental change. Would we have listened to him, we would have been a lot better now.
Okay.
The Reagans, when they moved in, they took them down because they were unsightly.
Okay.
You know, sort of an example of
Yeah. So
denial.
Eileen mentions that when Carter was president, Carter had solar panels on the White House when they were taken down by Reagan. But I would argue here that what I'm hearing in this room is anger. Right? What I'm hearing in the room, I mean, that's fair. Like nobody's criticizing, right? Like there's a lot of anger about climate change in this room. Don's sitting here saying in Jeff City, they said this denial thing, but you can hear in Don's voice, for those of you online or far away from Don, Don's not happy about what's being said in Jeff City, right? Eileen's saying they took down the solar panels that Carter was nice enough to put on top of the White House, right? And I would say that
I don't think that
the back channels of the Facebook and the Reddit and all the other forums online, there's a lot of anger towards a lot of the people who actually have a lot of control over this thing, right? There's a lot of anger towards Jeff Bezos's choices, or a lot of anger towards the choices of ExxonMobil and whoever else, right? It might
I
be
think it's,
frustration with the oil companies, yes.
Last Friday afternoon, James River Basin Association had a cleanup day out at Lake Spring,
Huh?
5 hours, and filled an enormous trash, not a barrel, one of these things that bring in behind it, a huge truck, with stuff that people had just thrown on the side of the road out there.
Okay, so Mike just shared that I'm gonna paraphrase it here, the James River Basin cleanup got an entire big truckload dumpster, out of the river last week. And it was obviously stuff that was not left by accident when it flew away from people's picnics, that it was tires and such. So anger might look like big mad at the people who caused it. It might also, I would say, look different for different generations. I deal with a lot of the younger generations, and it feels different, the anger that's coming from them, because they didn't watch this unfold, right? And it might be big mad, somebody said something about big cars, right? It might be anger at the people in our culture, even the little guys who are still using what might be perceived as an unfair share. What's bargaining look like? Bargaining,
You have to give up. Expect them.
you gotta give up something,
Yeah, you're trying to convince somebody to do something.
okay? What's bargaining look like for climate change?
If you're using those recycled bags, then you don't order something from Amazon, you buy local.
See, that's still anger, you're still in anger, Marilyn. Marilyn said if you're using recyclable bags, you don't order off Amazon. But bargaining might be, all right, I'm gonna do all the recycling I can. I personally have little control, but I'm gonna recycle everything that comes through my house, right? It might be living a more austere life. And that's not to say that this shouldn't happen. This is just talking about how you're processing this thing, right? I've seen some of y'all's backyards. Y'all are living these there are so many tin cans filled with tomato seedlings in the backyards of y'all's home. I have seen some of them, right? Y'all are making do and making things work and using the tote bags over and over and over again. But bargaining also can be, in this case, well, bargaining in this case, all we can bargain is what we have control over, right? And the chips are out of our control in so many ways that when we're thinking about our personal experiences, what does depression look like?
Or hopeless, like it's never gonna change, or.
Okay. It might be tossing the tin can in the trash can as you walk past it because, yeah,
Resignation.
resignation. It might be this is gonna happen, right?
I thought if everybody opens their windows in the summer and closes the doors in the winter, turns the heat down.
Right, so Foxy's over here saying that if everybody was more responsible with the heating and cooling of their home, right? Depression might be literal depression. It might be the existential kind of climate dread or climate terror. And what does acceptance look like?
I wouldn't know. Doing what we can, even though it's imperfect.
Bab said, doing what we can, even though it is imperfect. I don't think that acceptance means that we have to accept that the world is ending. We can keep doing next foot forward. But it can also mean and involve taking a deep breath and looking at the question of where we are actually at in this thing, and the question of what humanity's role in this is, and the question of, in this room, how our Unitarian Universalist values play out in that centering of humanity in its experience of climate crisis.
What we are hearing is that any one of us might be experiencing any one of these stages at any time. And compassion in human relationships means understanding that this big change, this global trauma that is unfolding will require some real adjustments. But what does real adjustments mean in this case?
The 2018-2019 UUA Common Read Book of the Year was a book titled Justice on Earth, People of Faith Working at the Intersections of Race, Class, and the Environment. This is a Unitarian Universalist book through and through. edited by Reverend Manish Marzati and Reverend Jennifer Nordstrom. This is a collection of really good essays. It's worth reading. But what we'd like to lift up today is part of the included essay by Unitarian Universalist ministers Reverend Peggy Clark and Reverend Matthew McHale. Page 61 begins with the heading, Congregations as Centers for Community Resilience. Our religious communities have the potential to become models of the future we want to create. Yet the 20th century prototype of congregational life is insufficient for the radical changes we face in the 21st century. As much as we love our Sunday worship, faith development classes, potlucks, and even committee meetings, these alone will not carry us to a new age. Life as we know it is dramatically changing. With global temperatures rising at alarming rates, we are already seeing the effects of drought on food systems, rising sea level on island nations and coastal towns, increased intensity of storms in our cities, and melting ice caps on access to fresh water. Mitigating this frightening trend will require a World War II scale effort. While such an effort needs governmental support, the real shift will happen in small pockets throughout the world. Unlike World War II, we aren't transforming an economic system temporarily. We are transforming all of our systems permanently. To do that successfully, houses of worship will need to become centers of hope and resiliency. Resilient congregations will be fully engaged. Vonnegut camera, Fox. Find a place to sit, please. Resilient congregations will be fully engaged in their communities. They will provide a meeting place for community organizing and shelter after natural disasters. They will be learning centers for the necessary process of reskilling, growing food, repairing things, building naturally, maintaining renewable energy systems. They might even provide land on which we can grow our food together. We can imagine congregations hosting free sharing sites and ways for people to barter services, allowing us to shift away from an economic system that relies on endless growth.
You'll probably notice that some of the things listed or described here, that the book was written in 2018, but these are already happening at First UU. We've had the lovely gardens outside for years, and more recently we have the free exchange table out here in the hallway for gardening supplies, and then the social action circle has been funding small off-site personal gardens this summer. We've also stepped up with opening our doors for the warm and shelter through the bitter cold during the winter of 2020 and 21. But Reverend Clark and Reverend McHale go on. Living out this vision may require letting go of other things, some beloved and some that we habitually spend a tremendous amount of energy on. Any act of resistance should also build community and power. If it's always the same small group, you can only accomplish small things. So in planning an activity or action, consider how to involve more people, which will probably require multiple paths for engagement. So, I mean, these are questions that we can ask ourselves now and in the coming years. And what are some of the things that the First UU Church is willing to let go of to build a better community? And how are we involving more people in our actions moving forward? Not just folks in this congregation, but also in the local community.
Earlier in the same essay, there's a quote from Gopal Dayanani, a core organizer at a movement generation organization. This is a movement building organization that offers training, resources, and support to social movements that are led by low-income communities and communities of color. The organization explains that there are 4 R's that are necessary for transformative justice work to occur. They are resistance, fighting against the destructive aspects of the dominant system; resilience, building capacity to survive, thrive, and navigate change; restoring living systems and ecological integrity, and reimagining a different world. And here's the quote that keeps coming to my mind when I think about this. The best acts of resistance are acts of resilience. When we actually create the solutions that create resilience and the capacity to navigate change as well as community, that in and of itself can be an act of resistance. But what exactly is the ask here? The actionable. It's complicated because while we are here, we cannot truly understand where this crisis is taking us. And some of this, using the church grounds as a garden for the food supply, as the food supply is disrupted by rising temperatures and severe weather conditions, creating plans to use our building as a shelter in case of a climate change fueled natural disaster. It sounds nearly apocalyptic. There are other churches, many of them, that preach apocalypse readiness and end time scenarios. Talking about the shifts of community that are going to be necessary to handle the incoming, currently arriving climate crisis might sound worrisomely similar to folks familiar with or who have even come up through those spaces. The preaching of end times has never fit well with the rational approaches of Unitarians or Universalists or Unitarian Universalists. But also, the world has never faced this sort of unfolding disaster in recorded human history. When Alexander von Humboldt was writing about the interconnected nature of the forests, waterways, and land erosion in Venezuela in the early 1800s, he was talking about a specific spot on Earth, a region, a mountain. It would have likely been far outside his credulity to tell him the entire human habitat was under the same immediate threat from cycles similar to the ones he had described only 200 years later. But here we are. And what we're asking today is simply to start internally a little stretching. Start imagining what it means to embody actions not as part of our values to just prevent climate change, which we've certainly been doing for years, as we heard today in this room, and will continue doing, but also to respond to climate change as an active and unfolding humanitarian experience. We are likely to be much more prepared in the moment to do the hard work of justice if we have done the work now of considering how climate change might call us to deeper action. Thank you.